We announced the start of the operation Al-Aqsa Flood.
We are at war, not an operation, but at war.
Hello and welcome to this special edition of Middle East Matters. Well, it was by far the deadliest day in Israeli history, an unprecedented assault waged by Hamas militants involving thousands of rockets, an attack from the south by land, sea and air, and a hostage-seizing rampage that caught Israeli intelligence services completely off guard. Benjamin Netanyahu has vowed that the militant group will pay a heavy price for its atrocities as Israel responds with force, razing whole districts in Gaza to dust. Residents there are increasingly being left with nowhere to go. The longer it continues, the greater the chance that violence will spread to the wider region. Well, to discuss this and more, we're joined now by Professor Yossi Mekelberg, Associate Fellow with the Middle East and North Africa Programme at London's Chatham House. Thank you so much for being with us on the programme, Professor. Firstly, we saw some of those harrowing scenes in our opening montage there, a hugely traumatic time, obviously, for Israelis. Are we now essentially in unknown territory in terms of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict?
Hello. Thank you for having me. We are in a almost uncharted territory right now, and a very dangerous one. And it's sadly it's only the beginning. We'll see more of this. What happened inside Israel is unprecedented. The idea that hundreds, if not thousands, of Hamas militants managed to enter into Israel so unbearably easily and kill so many people, take hostage. More than 100, 150 people, including children and women. And then the Israel regroups and promise to respond and probably respond in full force, but we know what it means. And already there are hundreds of Palestinians killed, and Israel-Hamas troops on the border with Gaza. So we are ahead of us is a prolonged war. And this is the first time for a long time that Israel actually doesn't call it an operation, but declared war against Hamas and calling Gaza people to leave. I don't know where they can leave since they are blockaded, but it means that they also intend to inflict a great devastation on the Gaza Strip.
And Yossi, it really was an astonishing failure of Israeli security services on their part in terms of both intelligence gathering and how that intelligence was interpreted. Just how were they so caught off guard and unprepared?
This is a question that we can't give an answer. It's staggering. We are all shocked by this failure. But failures of intelligence, people look at it, whether you have the right information, do you use the right, Israel has many informers in Gaza, where they misled deliberately by Hamas, whether all the alternative digital intelligence doesn't work, but it's in intelligence not only how you go, it's what you look at. How do you prejudices, biases about the other side factor into your analysis? And I think we need to look not only on this specific case, which is as horrific as it is. We need to look at a complete failure, collapse of Israel's approach to Gaza, to Hamas, and to the Palestinian issue as well. The failed idea that you can have status quo in a way that nothing is going to change and security is guaranteed, collapse within few hours. And someone has to take responsibility. But more than personal responsibility, which of course goes all the way up to the Prime Minister, we fail to learn from history. We fail to learn, it's not only Israel, most countries, to learn from previous wars and conflict, to go and deal with the root causes of them, and to just deal with the here and now.
Professor, stay with us because we are going to take a closer look at the history of the Hamas militant group. It was formed in 1987 at the start of the first Palestinian Intifada. Cami Knight has more.
Its main objective, the destruction of Israel. Hamas is a militant Islamist organisation, the largest of several in Palestine. Its military wing, known as the Al-Qassam Brigades, is committed to carrying out an armed struggle against Israel.
The Zionist enemy will never have a place on the political map of the region.
That was the group's current leader, Ismail Haniyeh, who's now been in exile for the past 4 years. Hamas first came into being in 1987 after the start of the first Palestinian Intifada, the first uprising against Israel's occupation of the West Bank and Gaza Strip. Unlike other Palestinian factions, Hamas refuses to engage with Israel.
If you go back, Hamas was created in the 1980s, and it's all about creating an Islamist state in all of historic Palestine. Because of that, Hamas hates Israel the most, but they also don't have much love for the Palestinian Authority, which is secular. And not only is it secular as opposed to Islamist, but it believes in a two-state solution, and Hamas does not.
The group came to prominence when it rejected the Oslo Peace Accords in 1993 between Israel and the Palestine Liberation Organization, where the PLO agreed to give up armed resistance against Israel in return for promises of an independent Palestinian state. The group's military wing led a campaign of suicide attacks killing scores of Israelis that many have blamed for Israel turning its back on the peace process. The year 2000 saw the second Intifada, brutally repressed by Israeli forces, which gave momentum to Hamas's popularity. After Israel withdrew from the Gaza Strip in 2005, Hamas took part in the 2006 Palestinian legislative elections for the first time and scored a landslide victory. It led to a bloody conflict with Fatah, the former ruling Palestinian party, but ended with Hamas seizing control of Gaza in 2007. The group continued its attacks on Israel, but slightly changed its military strategy.
It's been known for suicide bombings targeting buses and cafes. Later, when it conquered the Gaza Strip by force of arms and turned its guns on fellow Palestinians in 2007. After that, because it had territory, it built up a rocket arsenal and would fire rockets at Israeli communities.
Hamas is subject to economic and diplomatic sanctions by Israel and its allies in the West, who recognise the group as a terrorist organisation. They recognise the PLO, led by Mahmoud Abbas, as Palestinian leadership. However, Hamas has long received funding and weapons from Iran and is supported by Lebanese militant group Hezbollah.
Professor Yossi Mekelberg is still with us. So, Professor, what next then for Hamas? Israel says it must be crushed. It says it's ready to fight a long war.
I think, we heard this kind of warnings and threats towards Hamas for many years. But I believe this time Israel means it. Because it's in many ways, it's beyond Hamas now. It's for Israel to reestablish its deterrence. It needs to send messages to Islamic Jihad, to Hezbollah, to Iran. So the idea that Hamas changed to an extent, and some of us thought that there were changes within Hamas that were ready to look, for instance, a long ceasefire, Hudna, to coexist with Israel one way or another, as long that conditions improve in Gaza. This went up in smoke in a matter of few hours. So I think the decision now in Israel is to eliminate Hamas altogether. And it's also hard to see how Hamas, even if it survived, can be a partner for any political process for a very long time.
How great then is the threat of a wider conflict involving perhaps Hezbollah?
I think in a way the message to Hezbollah and to Iran, to Tehran, stay away from that. And the fact that the United States sent 6 vessels, including a air carrier, to this part of the Mediterranean is a clear sign. If you think you can exploit Israel's weakness right now, in case that Israel can deal with fighting in 2 fronts or even more fronts, then it has the full backing on the United States. I think the message was very clear. At this moment, the entire international community is behind Israel. But I think it's also for Israel to remember that it can, in a way, after losing the high moral ground for so many years, to recapture some of this high moral ground, but not to waste it by overreacting in Gaza. So I think it's really time to really think long term, and by the end of the war in Gaza, to think what Israel, what is the nature of relation with the Palestinians in a way that also reduce motivation, to allow to Palestinians to live with dignity, with independence, that their human rights, their political rights, the civil rights are recognized. So there is on one way is what Israel's plans vis-a-vis Hamas, but also they have to think about the rest of the population that has nothing to do with Hamas. They are living themselves under the oppression of the Hamas and definitely are not Israel's enemies.
Netanyahu, though, he is under pressure here, isn't he? He stoked tension and division as months of mass protests we've seen in Israel over his plans for judicial reform. Do you think that it's inevitable that this will lead to a further polarization of politics in Israel?
I think in Israel, as in Israel, now that it's in a state of war, I think the country unites. I see people just collecting all sorts of clothes and other things, food for the soldiers, and putting their cars and going and deliver it. Reserve soldiers are already back in their units. I think if Hamas and maybe also Hezbollah think that because reservists protested against Netanyahu and said they won't serve under a dictatorship, at the same time they are not going to react to something like this, they got it very wrong. Right now, everyone is back to their units. People are flying. Israelis that have been on holiday or study abroad are actually fly back to Israel. When situations like this happen, they unite. But it doesn't mean that it saves Netanyahu and gives him in any shape or form a blank check to weaken the Israeli democratic system and also to compromise what should be a peace with the Palestinians.
Professor Yossi Mekelberg, thank you so much for your time on the programme. Well, that is it for this week's special edition of Middle East Matters. Do stay with us for more world news here on France 24.
Every week, Mark Perelman talks one-on-one to a personality at the heart of the news.
And of course, we will continue to closely monitor Russia and what they do.
We are a people who want to be free, who want to have a democracy, and who want justice in the country.
There are still these responsibilities of the world that are kept.
Great. Hear the views that matter in Tête à Tête every week on France 24 and France24.com.